At what point does inspiration become imitation? And how far do you have to go for that imitation to become limitation? There are many games that try to replicate From Software and fail in the process. There are many grimdark retellings of children's tales that end up flat and boring. When I first heard of the Pinocchio Souls-like, I thought it was sure to fall into the same categories. So you can imagine my surprise when it turned out to be one of my favorite games. When NeoWiz released Lies of P, the two main games it was compared to were Sekiro and Bloodborne. This comparison could be both good and bad. Good in that those are two excellent games to draw from, and bad in that it could be too derivative of both, ending up worse than either of its primary inspirations. But as I played as Pinocchio and chopped robots and zombies to pieces, I found it to be neither. At least most of the time. Despite having many shared elements with the two games, Lies of P is remarkably distinct from them and from any of the Souls games. I'd say it's even on par with them and in some ways stands proudly above them. But surely a game that takes this much from existing works can't be that original. It can't feel that different. And it's true that Lies of P's entire DNA is comprised of other sources. But let's see how that imitation finds its way into something new. Lies of P has a very notable element from Sekiro. Perfectly time your block when an attack is about to hit you and an orange flash and clang sound appears. This negates all damage. If you mistime your block but still manage to avoid it, you take some chip damage. The other form of alleviating damage operates more along the lines of Bloodborne. You can normally roll, but while locked on, this is replaced by a quick sidestep. If you take chip damage while blocking, you can regain lost health by attacking enemies. It's like the rally, but only if you block, not if you get hit. And so, while Bloodborne's system promotes relentless animalistic aggression, Lies of P promotes precision, with a playstyle active in both attack and defense. The most important thing is not doing nothing, made even clearer as enemies regain health if not attacked for long enough. So what prevents these two from clashing? Being able to both deflect and dodge creates a big risk of imbalance. Lies of P makes a distinction by making each a little harder to pull off. Perfect guard timing is noticeably harder than Sekiro with a tighter perfection window. You can't deflect mid-attack animation like Sekiro, meaning each motion of yours is a commitment that exposes you to a hit. You actually have a stamina bar for attack motions unlike Sekiro, meaning the risk of your poise being broken and exposure to a hit is higher. The dodge then becomes the safer but less rewarding option. You miss out on the potential poise and weapon damage to the enemy, but you can avoid damage much more easily with lower risk. A simple balance, and while there's a chance players may lean into one playstyle and avoid another, that may not be a bad thing. It's impressive how the simple combination of these two mechanics allows for so much playstyle variety, and mixing up both makes combat come into its own. And how does this feel? Well, nearly as good as its inspirations. The sound design and visual effects of Perfect Guarding feel good, and it's satisfying to learn the boss moveset and perfectly block everything. The dodge animation is great too, a more realistic motion than Bloodborne's exaggerated one, which is fitting for a game of this style. There's also the fact that landing a killing critical on an enemy can make them explode, which is a perfect chef's kiss. All that being said, I do wish that the blocks had deflection animations rather than just being a regular block with a flashier sound. It still feels good as is, but it's certainly less impactful than the deflection in other games, where the animation feels almost like an attack in itself, adding more responsiveness to each parry. Meanwhile, Pinocchio holds his weapon in a static blocking stance. It's an issue that's alleviated by how rewarding the deflection is in itself, the tighter window making each success more satisfying. But having more distinct animation to go with it could elevate the combat system even further, and it's something I'd love to see pursued in a future title. With these methods of avoiding damage in mind, let's move quickly to your own attacks. Weapons work very much like the Souls games with light and heavy combos, but unlike Souls, the game's many weapons can be taken apart and assembled back together, separated into handles and blades. Handles determine moveset and scaling, while blades determine attack speed. Each piece has a fable art attached, meaning you can customize weapons with 2 skills each. The other element is the unique left arm with replaceable gadgets, only this time you're replacing the entire arm instead of adding something to it. Lies of P has 10 of these, all of which are beautifully modeled and animated. We have a shield with a strong counterattack, unique sweeping damage types for different elements, more simple but effective ranged attacks, a hard-hitting mid-range attack, the piece of shit nobody uses, and a powerful distance closer. The weapons and the arm are the bread and butter of Lies of P and hold the most potential for creative expression. The weapon customization is genuinely fantastic. Not only do you choose your moveset, you can also choose the moveset's speed. You can tweak scalings with the cranks you find across the game to make them suit your build. Picking blades and handles also means picking Fable arts, letting you put together your favorite ones. It's a wonderful system and it makes 50 weapons feel like 500. Add to that the unique boss weapons, which make up for that lack of disassembly with much more unique moves. The Pale Knight is, without exaggeration, my favorite Souls game weapon. Attacks that flow into each other, excellent sound design, powerful Fable arts, and a beautiful model. Your Legion arms are ultimately supplementary, but they do have their own applications as well, be it as ranged options, powerful finishers, or counters to specific enemy types. Pulling from an entirely different resource makes them reliable as an occasional mix-up. Granted, the progression system for the arms is a little convoluted. Legion calibers are used to upgrade a chosen arm, but you can refund these freely at the gold coin tree, meaning the only thing preventing you from maxing out every arm you want to use is a mild inconvenience. And this inconvenience does little but waste your time and demotivate variety. With how varied and niche each arm is, it would be nice if swapping between them and upgrading them was made a simpler process. Attacks, Legion arm moves, and deflects all build up poise damage to an enemy, which then naturally leads to a poise break, much like the other games. But in this game, a poise break that opens up for a riposte requires a fully charged heavy, much like Bloodborne's backstabs. But while that game had them be instantaneous if done from behind, Lies of P still needs you to whittle poise down first, till their health bar becomes white. It's a small change, but a very important one. Charged heavy attacks need openings to be pulled off safely, meaning you need to observe your enemy and find a safe opening rather than brute forcing it, further enforcing that very precision-oriented combat. You could use the window to heal, but doing that instead of getting in that attack might make the timer run out, might rob you of huge damage. And that satisfaction in the game's design extends this mechanic even further. Breaking the poise of a white health bar is incredibly rewarding, the very concept of needing a powerful hit to stun enemies being tied strongly to the game's world. It makes sense and it's executed flawlessly. So is the critical itself. One of the Souls game's common complaints is difficulty in figuring out how to riposte. The games never tell you that you essentially have to be touching the enemy to begin the animation, it simply expects you to do so and press the light attack button. Lies of P, meanwhile, has a specific visual indicator of where to stand and magnetizes you to it. It's a minuscule change but a wonderful quality of life feature of which the game has many. Poise isn't just broken by heavy attacks, however. Aside from Legion arm attacks, some of which can also do so, the other way enemy poise can be broken is often using Fable arts. These pull from this game's mana equivalent, restored not just by consumables but simply by attacking enemies. And its renewable nature encourages you to use it instead of hoarding it once those bars are full. Many of these attacks serve the same purpose as heavy ones, able to break an enemy's poise in the same way, and the higher hyper armor you get during these animations is another natural incentive to use them often. Some are automatic follow-ups to deflections, some close further distances, and almost all of them feel great to use. These aren't the only types of Fable arts though. Some have more defensive uses and others more suited for groups than single targets. That's where the weapon customization comes into play again, letting you pick out your favorite ones alongside the respective weapon movesets. Lies of P admittedly doesn't have a sizable portion of certain Souls builds, that being magic. There are no spells, whether those be consumable items or casted weapons. What it has is similar to Bloodborne's own elemental builds, status effects. And unlike many other Souls games and the very distinct varied ones, Lies of P sticks to 3, and all 3 are simple to understand and execute. Electric Blitz for puppets, Fire for carcasses, and Acid for humans. The application of these is moderated by a single stat, allowing for a decent amount of build diversity while still focusing almost entirely on the melee side of combat. The non-melee side is fulfilled instead by Legion arms, yes, but also by consumables. On my first Elden Ring playthrough, I found myself gathering fire pots that I ended up never throwing, because they suck. Lies of P does not fall into this same trap. Most of its consumables are extremely powerful. Fable Catalysts charge up your abilities quicker to deal more damage, the Shot Put is an instant poise breaker, and the elemental throwables are very effective against their respective enemy types. And finally, we have healing. Much like the Souls games, you have your consumable which refills at checkpoints. It's functionally identical with one little twist. When your pulse cells run out, attacking enemies slowly begins to recharge one more cell. It's a small little comeback mechanic, but much like the stagger system, it's not a gimmick, instead allowing for some genuinely exciting moments with enough precision and care. And notably, critical attacks help recharge your pulse cell much quicker, once again encouraging you to go for a stagger every action pushing you towards it. This is the part of the video where, after I discuss the many excellent aspects of the combat design, I begin to discuss its weaknesses, its flaws, what it lacks from its inspirations, and what it could do better. Okay, I'm done. Lies of P's combat is easily its strongest aspect, and why I chose to discuss it first. It combines the best aspects of its inspirations while forming an experience that feels expressive, unique, and fitting to its world. And while I might find the reason to nitpick a few little things, it's difficult to find any real sweeping criticisms. It is a system perfectly made for replays, for opportunities to change things up if you've hit a wall. It's something that manages to rip so many things from so many games and hit the best parts of each without ever feeling unnatural. A multitude of playstyle options is what the developers intended, and it clearly worked. But of course, good combat relies on good enemies, a strong context, good encounter design, and a world to experience them in. Lies of P may have won the combat race, but can it really exceed the other achievements of the countless games that it pulls from? With combat in mind, we can take a look at, well, everything else that comprises Lies of P. The easiest place to start would be its levels. Its teleport screen makes no false pretenses on the game's structure. Lies of P is a linear story game presented in chapters, and its design is slightly more linear than Dark Souls 3. In much the same way, its most notable design boils down to having several shortcuts that lead back to the same Stargazer. Like Dark Souls 3, nothing about this design is bad, just a little unremarkable. Unlike Dark Souls 3, Lies of P doesn't carry the weight of having two predecessors with more interesting design. Its chapter system and simpler story presentation is distinct enough for that linearity to feel much more acceptable from the get-go. What is it about Dark Souls' world that is so compelling that is missing from some of Dark Souls 2 and most of Dark Souls 3? Part of it is, genuinely, I think, the limitation to teleporting. Every game since the first title has been heavily reliant on traveling between save points. For games like Elden Ring, it's a choice made because of the world's scale. But in a game like Dark Souls 3, it's done to alleviate the linear design. Going back to Firelink by foot isn't nearly as compelling if you're going in a straight line in the opposite direction you just came from. Lies of P follows much of the same logic, which is serviceable for what it does. I don't mind Stargazers letting you go anywhere. But one thing I'm not huge on is giving you the moon phase pocket watch, effectively an infinite homeward boon. It's not an egregious decision, but why give it immediately when the game begins? It essentially renders the instant kill item you start with pointless. The appeal of homeward bones in the other games was their limitation, the fact that you still had to find your way to a bonfire in the midst of a combat encounter or a difficult situation. It created a constant tension. The infinite one was usually given later in the game, where individual encounters were more consequential than the long-term risk. And while not something you might immediately process, it does make immersion more fragile. I think it is telling that the closest I felt a game come to the first two Souls titles in years is not Dark Souls 3 or Sekiro or Bloodborne or Elden Ring, but Silksong. Even something as simple as needing you to quit out to go back to a bench already creates a layer of separation. It's a gentle discouragement requiring you to actively break immersion to make use of the quick shortcut. But in allowing this magical teleportation at any time within the world's context, with minimal visual effort to make it immersive at all, your presence becomes more abstract. And in a game like this, where the combat manages to amplify the immersion so effectively, it's unfortunate how many aspects of the game are willing to spoil the fact that you are in a video game. There are many of these, the most notable of which is the abysmal, insulting, annoying, filthy use.
Strange. Jeepers. Is that a butterfly? If you want to check it out, I can take point. Isn't the old woman of the, venerable lady looking for some wine? You know, like the wine you've got? I do love this view. It is a nice view, but we must be moving. We got a key for Marciona. Hey, I bet it opens that gate we passed before entering the greenhouse. This place is definitely a dead end, and since Leia's not here, let's go back. Locked. We'll need the key. I saw something earlier at the top of the carousel
How did you
that caught
see
my
that?
eye. But
What?
how to get up there?
How do you know
Ferris
that?
wheel.
What you just witnessed were the situations where Gemini backseats your gameplay. He doesn't just do that, to be clear, he also backseats the story, but that's something for later. To me, Gemini is a symptom of a major flaw in Neo's philosophy. The fact that Lies of P is very afraid of the player forgetting what to do, where to go, and how to feel. As a result, there are many moments which seem inconsequential but a little too sanitized. And this adds up, as if the game doesn't want you to feel in tune with its world. There are situations where being kinder, guiding the player a little more, and providing less friction might be beneficial for the player. For example, your ergo count becomes blue when you can afford your next level. That's a great change. But there are other times where this occurs, times where it feels far less natural and far less necessary. NPCs are another distinct example. I understand that you're a child in Geppetto's eyes and that he talks down to you, but it's hard not to feel like you're getting babied throughout the entire playthrough, not by characters but by the developers. When you defeat the scrapped watchman, Gemini tells you there's nothing left in the area and that it's a dead end and that we should go back to the hotel. The hotel teleport sign has a big Geppetto icon on it. Geppetto tells you where Vanini is, back through the exact progression path you were just interrupted from moving into. He gives you a key that opens a single path, telling you again that that's where Vanini is. Then he tells you about the penis organ, and then he tells you where Vanini is again and that the key he just gave you leads to Vanini. The game treats this as if it's something missable when it's literally the only practical progression path. These nearly immersion-breaking features are made worse with actual immersion-breaking features. Post-game gift content is simply added into inventories at the very start of the game, meaning new players will begin with Alidoro's entire set before you even meet him, rather than him just dropping it on death like he should. New players start with the single most broken, overpowered weapon in the entire game. Starting the DLC opens a big menu that looks like an ad pop-up with its own mini menu music, just in case you somehow didn't know this was the DLC entrance. There are many other situations where the game opts to really home it in so that you're sure of what it's talking about. And in trying to make itself more understandable and trying to make you more in tune with its messaging and story, the game veers too hard to the other end. It becomes annoying. You quickly understand that this game outside of combat is not going to challenge you or make you think because it's doing all the thinking for you. It's fascinating how this presentation has affected the game's standing, because if we're talking about combat, this game is just as, if not harder than most Souls games. But it doesn't have the reputation they have because every other facet of its design ensures you're following along. It is reflective of, I believe, a complete lack of trust in the player. And so I find Lies of P to fail to deliver on world engagement at a very base level. It cares very much for how you experience its combat, but the world itself rarely ever feels like more than a video game level, so linear and straightforward and so prone to revealing its actors and set. Let's be a little nicer for a moment. The game has good encounter design. While the final stretch of both the base game and DLC take far too long and are far too convoluted, it's quite impressive how much it manages to vary its encounters in every moment, be it with different enemy interactions, unique terrain, or with some sort of environmental twist. It's simple and very effective, helped very much by the pacing of these enemies. It begins with the simple puppet enemies, mixes in rotting carcass zombies, combines both, sometimes quite literally with new mutated puppet bodies, and introduces more human enemies to the mix. In a way, it reflects your own journey from puppet to human. A few little hazards are present in every one too, whether they be created by enemies or by the areas themselves. Many of them also introduce new enemy types to ensure you don't breeze through everything. Lies of P may only have a few types of enemies, but each faction is surprisingly varied. I was struck throughout my playthrough of the base game by how fresh it felt for what was almost its entire runtime. The strongest aspect of encounter design is easily the mini-bosses. Throughout your adventure, you'll run into a few stronger types of enemies, each of which only appears once or twice throughout an entire playthrough. The Jester Clown puppet with 2 clubs is a great example, a mini-boss with 2 distinct encounters, both of which involve its killing carcasses. Its animation is fun and unique, its moveset is challenging and intimidating, and it's never overused. You'd expect its return in the DLC to be much the same, but it's got completely new moves and is fought completely differently, making it more of a boss fight. This brings in another really strong aspect of the game, very good enemy reuse. With a few exceptions, returnees always feel special. The puppet bodies inhabited by carcasses are essentially reused puppets with a few new tentacle moves, but they make complete sense within the world and are even foreshadowed by the green monster beforehand. They're far more challenging while also rewarding your engagement with previous fights. The DLC's enemy reuse is a little less interesting, with a couple of them just being the same, but there are appreciated ones too, like the newer Parade Master with its repeated hits, the cleaner puppets that attack you by sweeping you, and the explosive clown girls being repurposed into dancing clown boys. With a few new animations and new models, they could feel entirely new. The frozen seaside enemies are mostly using the exact same rigs and base animations as the other alchemist enemies, but their combo timings have been tweaked, their outfits are different, and it still makes sense for them to look similar. The ubiquity of puppets in this world means the alchemist reskin of the sword puppets can be understood as the alchemist taking and modifying those very puppets to serve them. And with all of these enemies comes the combat I mentioned earlier, and it makes for a very good 1-2 punch. Combat in this game feels good not just because of its systems, but because you very often feel like you're doing something new, and it always manages to pull you in. I like how easily bloody or oil-stained your clothes can become from combat. Unlike Elden Ring, your character doesn't look soaked in mud while in the rain. Rainfall comes down in curtains, often with lightning strikes that illuminate all the surroundings. Unreal Engine works wonders for making this game look really good. Now, notably, while Lies of P has high graphical fidelity, it is true that it doesn't have too much in stylization. It applies much more to animation and character design than it does to the world itself, which visually takes the form of slightly exaggerated realism. And so the game has to rely on the puppets' jittery motions, the zombies' lumbering swings, the unique movesets and costumes and color. There is always an issue in all of the Souls games of areas not being very believable. Many places end up being too small or too empty or too convoluted. More often than not, you're able to suspend your disbelief, the fact that no place would ever have something like this. Lies of P's enemy designs, in spite of the occasional absurdity like the gigantic wrecking ball puppets being symbols of progress, are never too much to take me out of it. The character design is goofy enough as a baseline to accommodate a little silliness. I know everyone talks about the spider puppets in the opera house, but I think they're rather beautiful and fit the theater environment wonderfully, possibly even controlling the puppets from above the stage. Nearly every puppet design is acceptable enough, whether they be for service work, entertainment, or for more nefarious purposes. What I do mind, however, is when this level of ridiculous exaggeration extends to the game's world design. I have for you now what I believe to be the single worst example of this. Valentinus is the owner of the beautiful Monad charity house. To get to his bedroom, you need to go into the kitchen, down some stairs, up a ladder, and through an elevator. Right. From here, there's a secret chest piece in the bookshelf that opens a secret room, and inside you can find the storage housing for the literal arm of God. Now, behind this container, a small study room has another secret chest piece that opens up to a library. From here, you have to jump down and break your ankles to progress. This leads to a larger, entirely secret library with medieval gates for some reason. You can find even more secret chest pieces here that open up secret tiny alcoves with nothing in them. From here, a rusty ladder in the middle of this ornamental building is used to get to the second floor. From the second floor, go down another ladder into this tiny room and move a giant secret chest piece, which moves one of the library's bookshelves a little. From here, go back up and you can now walk across the bookshelves with halves connected with flimsy wooden planks to the other side. This leads back to the first smaller library section. I hope you're following because there will be a quiz on this next week. From here, flick yet another giant secret chest piece to open yet another bookshelf door. After this, kill the big guy, drop back down to the first floor, go down this hallway and unlock the final door. This leads to the Rose Garden. All that was to get to the garden. The orphanage garden is hidden behind more layers of secrecy than the literal arm of God. Why is this the case? because the garden is where you fight the final boss. It's not because the garden itself is important, it's that they want you to fight the boss there and so inexplicably hide it behind the most absurd layers possible. With this example... Okay, my throat hurts. I'm gonna continue recording tomorrow. With this example and many others I don't have the heart to discuss, it becomes clear that the game prioritizes its story over its own immersion, over its own believability. And it leans into a more fantastical theme but never commits to it enough and doesn't go to the right places. The labyrinth of the charity house would be far less egregious if it was more heavily stylized, if the secrecy wasn't so off-putting with the general mundanity of its architecture. It doesn't feel like a carefully devised secret path created by Valentinus. It feels like the level designers simply gave up on having the location make sense. And here is another flaw that becomes very evident. Lies of Peace areas are bland. Almost every base game area suffers from Dark Souls 3 syndrome. Streets are gloomy and dark and colors are consistently desaturated and drab. The Opera House is a wonderful looking change of pace that you can walk through in less than 5 minutes. The arcade and exhibition have more marble and ornamentation, but are lit just as depressingly as other sections. Lies of P is a game that so very often tries to balance its grim dark grittiness with a stylized whimsy. More often than not, because of the lacking vibrance, the former is prioritized over the latter. In a developer interview for Unreal Engine, Round 8 Studio said the following, quote, "We carefully calibrated the color temperatures of the lights to match the aesthetic of 19th century gas lamps prevalent during the period that serves as a backdrop for the game. Additionally, special attention was given to the interaction of environmental lighting with effects, ensuring a cohesive and visually impactful experience." End quote. This is an admirable effort if true, and the intentionality may be what prevents Lies of Peace areas from looking bad. But it can't avoid looking bland. Its commitment to the era is one thing, but tonal darkness isn't limited to one palette. Virtually every FromSoft game other than 3 manages to display this effectively. I truly hoped Frangelico's Cathedral would be a unique change of pace when I entered its beautiful interior, but the entire level then takes place in its underground basement of wood and stone. I'm of the belief that a balance of beauty and horror can often make for some of the most memorable set pieces. Lies of Peace base game doesn't take this lesson all the way up till its final area. While having strong potential while running up the beach towards the tower itself is a bland collection of wood and stone. The developer reasons that the lighting was made in tandem with effects, possibly referring to the greater contrast your flashy moves would create with the environment. But this contrast is achievable without going as far as they did. Thankfully, the DLC somewhat resolves these issues. Overture reiterates that Lies of P is a very pretty game when it makes the correct choice to be one. It's clearly capable of looking stunning when it wants to be. The Krat Zoo is a wonderful area, snow-laden and filled with interactive exhibits, unique and fun animal enemies, and variation in nature with the many sections of the zoo. The frozen coast with its sky, aurora, and offset shipwrecks is a perfect final push before the grand finale. Imagine if more of this effort had gone into the base game, rather than so much of it being comprised of repeating rich and poor streets. What if the buildings in collapsing Krat began melting, spreading their pristine marble to the floor? What if the Lorenzini arcade had more colorful advertisements, lights that got color when filtering through stained glass? What if a powerful storm raged the higher you climbed the Isle of Alchemists, obscuring your view, the swarm of Ergo flying through the air till you broke above the clouds in the final battle? This is, of course, not to say that the area visuals are bad. Much like Dark Souls 3, the poor artistic choice of bland colors can often be made up for with architecture, with a good understanding of its buildings and streets. One of Lies of P's biggest comparisons is Bloodborne, as we all know, but while that's perfectly valid when it comes to combat, it's something of a disservice to draw a perfectly clear artistic link. Playing both games, it becomes evident that they draw from two very, very distinct eras. While both have steampunk themes, Bloodborne's aesthetic is Victorian and much more dirty and improvised in its development. A world where magic is still arcane and unknowable, studied with incantations and glyphs defined by its symbolism. Mechanics are put together with more screws and modular gears, displayed most clearly by its trick weapons and their rough industrial design. Lies of P, on the other hand, is Belle Epoque, and its approach to its mechanical design is more electric, more scientific, clearly based on an era of innovation and invention. Its weapons are cleaner, more formal, shinier, and maintained with more devastating capabilities. And when its magic occurs, it feels more prone to categorization, existing within the elements, within crystals harnessed in its technology. Bloodborne's elemental stat of Arcane is contrasted with Lies of P's elemental stat of Advance. This is helped further by some genuinely good sound design. There's no shame in using a sound library, and for the most part it's better than not. The clanging sounds of deflection are exactly as good as they need to be. The louder clang when your pulse cell is refilled is a distinct indicator. Healing sounds smooth and satisfying. And I especially love how your Legion arm rumbles like a car engine when opening a door the normal way or in the funny way. There's really only one sound in this game that completely took me out of it, the alarm sound in front of Foko's boss room, because it's my wake up alarm sound. And I forgive it because it's hilarious. In spite of some lacking visuals and in spite of the devastatingly bad immersion, Lies of P is more unique than people give it credit for. Its architecture doesn't feel very British, it feels French, and with its many influences, Lies of P builds an identity. While the darkness is somewhat unremarkable on some streets, it becomes a different experience when paired with the heavy rain and thunder that beats down on you. The most silly sounds are all over the game, some underwhelming and some immersion breaking, but others are perfectly satisfying, rewarding, and selling those mechanical sensations. And even when the lighting feels like nothing, it's often elevated by the distinctive shapes and structures of the surrounding buildings. And so Lies of P never looks bad. Because of its strong artistic commitment, the worst it ever looks to me is boring. There is artistry all over this game, even if obscured by grey. That extends, of course, to what every new Souls game is usually defined by. Boss fights. They're important as capstones to areas, transitions between story progression and mechanical challenges for the player to master the game further. Does Lies of P live up to the potential of its combat, and does it hit the highs of FromSoft's greatest bosses? Well, yeah. Lies of P's bosses are excellent, holding up against FromSoft themselves in terms of quality. And they're a significant part of why this game feels less like a Souls-like and more of a straight-up Soulsborne. Each one is varied and visually unique, and most notably very well animated. Delays are contextualized as mechanical spasms or monstrous lumbering, and because of the game's very fantastical character designs, animations that might look a little ridiculous don't feel as bad as they ought to be. Like Seisha's absurd delays, animation speed changes, and extended periods of standing still should be pretty ridiculous. But as the game operates on a sillier base level, it's rare that anyone questions it. And there are very good animations too. Shrek's face transition as its tentacles coil into its puppet housing is incredibly well done, as is its movement within this new design. Romeo's melee swings and the Watchman's delayed strike attacks all feel in tune with their identities. Everything good about these bosses lies in the combat, a system I have no substantial complaints towards, one I have already discussed in detail. Every boss encourages engagement with these mechanics, often allowing a good mixture of dodging and deflecting. And while some bosses are notably more parry-focused and vice versa, the roster as a whole finds itself into a very well-designed balance. Of course, there are a fair share of stinkers, but these are often NPCs. NPCs are lacking for a few reasons. One, they use the humanoid player model but don't abide by many of the same rules regarding animation. The exaggerated delays and swiftness of the more tailored, fully modeled bosses is lost on these fights, leading to attacks that either feel too fast or too slow, not helped by their size in proportion to you. The DLCs do rectify this, however, with their two NPC fights being among the best. The movesets make far more sense, there's less awkward transitions and standing around, and they have some unique twists that make them more than just an edit of the player character. There is little mechanical commentary to give on Lies of P's standard boss movesets because they clearly fulfill everything the combat system demands. That's not to say they all play the same, of course, there is a level of experimentation to a lot of bosses, but they never reach a point where they turn into pure gimmicks. Every single boss seems to prioritize the very core elements of combat, and their mix-ups are more to provide a little variance between each, while rarely ever compromising their quality. Every boss has a good encouragement of attacks, deflects, and repositioning, be it by variable combos, AoEs, ranged options, constant arena hazards, or multiple enemies. There aren't many other things to say other than they're good and safe, demonstrated clearly with their gank fights. Lies of Peace ganks don't adhere to the ONS or Ruined Sentinels principle where movesets are rigid but designed specifically to work in tandem with each other. And while this means they can feel more like a 1v1 with an occasional hazard, the fantasy is sold well with nearly every fight. The Black Rabbit Brotherhood has one main enemy, the Eldest, with 3 coming in at set health intervals. They become the priority, with the main target going into a more passive state. This would be pretty boring if there were only 2 of them, but the fight throws 4 different movesets at you. Some are easy, some are difficult, but the adds don't do too much damage, instead whittling you down for the main target later. The other way Lies of P varies its bosses is simply by character design. Despite the generally humanoid shape of most of its encounters, it's not afraid to mix things up with how they attack. Some crawl on all fours, attacking you almost like an animal. Some have a more mechanical, industrial feel to them, making their robotic repetitions feel natural in the world's context. Big enemies have larger sweeping swings, while the classic fast humanoid bosses move around the arena more and introduce faster combos. It's a simple, effective balance you find in the Souls games that never feels repetitive. Part of that is in their very premise. It's a family of gangsters rather than 4 silent knights. It fights like a dragon, but it's a giant humanoid mutant. It's a horrifying swamp beast, but housed in the body of a discarded puppet. It's an NPC fight, but it becomes a monster halfway through. Veronique stands out to me especially, an NPC boss that very clearly reuses several animations but never feels wrong, fast and dangerous, who even subverts the backstab loop playstyle by breaking out of them. Lies of P sticks the landing with its bosses, and that's the most important thing I can say about them. Everything that makes them stand out was already set up with its combat, which, from every interview and every discussion, seemed to be the game's #1 priority, and in that regard it is a resounding success. But with all that in mind, how does the game motivate you? We come now to the story. The very first thing about Lies of P's story that I think of is when it falters, which is very frequently thanks to its presentation. Not because of a lack, but because of an excess. I've mentioned before how certain decisions make gameplay feel like you're being babied. This complaint extends further to story, and this is felt severely. It ranges from small simple things like Geppetto being able to spoil you on areas you've never heard about, to the genuine abomination that is Gemini's dialogue.
The classiest playboy and most brilliant inventor in Krat. Just ask him. Not just puppets. Almost every...
Monad's lamp, which hangs off your belt, has a unique function the game never tutorializes, wherein progressing a story event causes it to suck the immersion out of nearly all of this game's stakes and tension. I spoke earlier of Gemini ruining any sort of problem solving or conclusions the player could come to regarding gameplay, because he just tells you what to do half the time. When it comes to the story, Gemini is even worse. While the game's story was always going to be a little style over substance, there is absolutely a degree of fascination to its premise, to how it might twist Pinocchio into something grimdark and exciting. And the idea of having a talking companion to break tension, to teach you some lessons, to provide you with interesting information, isn't a bad idea. We all love a robot sidekick. Unfortunately, Gemini is none of those things. Gemini is a context machine that tries not to complement the game's story but to make up for it.
Terrible conclusion that schemers like him face in the end. What a fall from grace. He had everything. Why throw it all away like this?
His lines never say anything that you don't already know, save for context the game fails to deliver on in more natural ways. It gets worse when he goes from an annoying side character to something that is actively detrimental to the story experience. One of the DLC's most memorable moments is when Leia runs into Romeo's severed arms. The music swells, her voice actress delivers a great performance, tears in her eyes, voice breaking as she whispers to someone that may very well be dead. It's a strong introduction to the game's final area. A few seconds after this happens, Gemini begins to talk.
This is horrific. To see the arms of her apprentice like that. Do you think she'll be okay? I mean, that would destroy anyone, regardless of their resolve.
It is in this moment where I wish Lies of P adapted its source material more closely, whether Cricket is killed in the very chapter he's introduced in. Gemini's voice actor is not bad, but his writing is bad and his direction is worse. This bad direction in voice acting is prevalent all over the game. Line deliveries are stilted, unnatural, and written strangely, very clearly by someone who wasn't fully fluent in English. As such, voice actors have to make do with lines that feel recorded on their very first take.
Last time I woke up, Sophia was there because she woke me up.
No, that doesn't make sense. Remember, puppets cannot get the disease.
Localization and presentation is an issue that plagues much of Lies of P. The fact that upgrade materials are called Dark Moon Moonstone of the Covenant is proof enough, as are the many writings in the game that are not grammatically incorrect, but are certainly far more verbose and convoluted in structure than they need to be. Much like this video. But I think that looking past its shortcomings, Lies of P has an absolutely masterful and incredible narrative, possibly the best in video game history. To summarize, people doesn't die or become puppet, you just realize that they was puppet all the time. Why did you see it before? Because you were a puppet who still think he's humane, so everyone like you, puppet to look humane, cause if you feel humane and they are like you, then they must be humane also. But when you become a real boy, you now realize that all the others are now different, so if you are humane and they are different, then they must be puppet. It's an eye-opening ending. So what I just did was lie to you. I know, I hit it very well. I was actually quoting a random comment I found about the ending on Facebook. Now, did the lie I just make serve any real purpose other than a pointless joke? Did that make me feel warmth? Lies of P's biggest drawback, evidenced by the barrage of simplistic childlike babying scattered within, is its lack of nuance. This game always treats lying as good. Lying is the process which makes you more human. Your first lie is one you have to make to progress. You tell the hotel's security system that you're a human, allowing you to bypass its test on Asimov's law of robotics. From here, lying will slowly make you more and more human, essentially making that first lie into a truth. Each lie makes your springs react, then you begin to feel warmth, and finally your heart begins to pound. The hotel test is effectively a tutorial that tells you, quite simply, that lying is helpful. What is possibly my biggest issue with Lies of P is that there is almost never a reason to not lie, even if you feel that telling the truth may be helpful. There are situations in this game where telling the truth seems just like the better thing to do, so why does making those better choices deny you of humanity? I understand that lying is integral to the game's identity. It's a Pinocchio game. But I believe it deserves more nuance. Possibly the strongest story moment in the game for me was when a lie of P became a truth of P. A man was in love with a maid puppet and married her. A tabloid mocking him can be found earlier in the game too. He asks you to help find her, not telling you that she's a puppet till you come across her damaged puppet body with a wedding ring. Later he'll doubt himself as to whether the puppet ever loved him. To comfort him, you can lie and say a message was next to the body, one that said that she loved him. It makes him weep and thank you, and he gives you the wedding ring to remember. Later in the game, the servant puppet Polendina admits to you that he's in love with Antonia. And when he asks you if such a love is possible, you can show him the wedding ring. It's a moving moment and a genuinely great little way of tying things together. It's made even stronger when, at the very end of the game, you can go back to the broken maid puppet and a new message declaring her love for her husband is found written on the wall next to her. This is Lies of P at its best, when its story manages to hit simple but effective emotional beats, when it presents its grim, pessimistic world only to reveal an underlying love beneath, with just the right amount of story ambiguity that adds some room for interpretation without compromising its emotion. In this very same game, a blind painter asks you to retrieve the canvas on the floor. It's blank. She asks if her work of art is beautiful. If you tell this blind woman that her canvas is blank, she fucking dies. What? When Antonia looks at you, showing her face infected by petrification, she asks if any beauty is left within her. You can choose to tell her that there is nothing left, or say that there is still beauty there. But this is presented as a lie, when it isn't really that simple. You ask me, she's still beautiful, but the game never tries to blur the lines, never tries to ask questions about how an automaton would engage with something subjective. It's simply presented as a lie the same way nearly every other choice in this game is. Arlecchino's riddles are a fascinating part of the game because they're one of the only times where you aren't lying. Instead, you actually have to solve simple riddles, and while the guy talks way too much, he easily has the most memorable voice actor doing his best Heath Ledger Joker impression. But functionally, there is no difference between this and lying. You're still giving the most appropriate response to a prompt, it's just not framed as a lie. What I would propose if Neowiz ever wishes to revisit Pinocchio is to add some sort of benefit and drawback to lying. When Eugenie offers Alidoro a four-fingered glove, Alidoro rejects it because he's an imposter and the glove won't fit. You can then choose to tell Eugenie whether Alidoro liked it or not. Perhaps lying about the glove, telling her that he liked it, could deny you of some context. Perhaps she would be just happy about it. Instead, she then explains the glove is four-fingered and was made specifically for Alidoro, who was missing a finger. Naturally, Alidoro in the game does not have a missing finger. If the game was less overt, you might have to come to a slightly less obvious conclusion. But it's already obvious that Alidoro is an imposter, why not tell Eugenie rather than allow her to be fooled for no reason? A momentary happiness is prioritized over her actual safety, with Alidoro being a genuine threat to the hotel. He's literally muttering about a deal with the alchemist when you give him the glove, and you are rewarded for not making this threat known on the one occasion you have the chance to. When you tell her later that the real Alidoro was her brother, she thanks you for telling the truth, saying the truth is priceless. That is its own reward. I feel it's the morally better choice, something she deserves to know. She's an adult, someone who shouldn't be treated like a child who thinks Santa is real. But it makes her angry and distressed, and it denies you of your humanity points. It's not nonsensical for her to be mad about it, she has every right to be. But it's a subtle condemnation of truth by the game, presented negatively, and that's confusing, because humanity does not consist entirely of lies. Simon Manus is the game's main villain beyond the final twist of Geppetto, a raving, maniacally laughing alchemist with the power to read minds. This power disillusioned him because he discovered a dark, horrifying, unknown secret. People lie. Because of this, his philosophy is centered around a great truth. He raves and rants about the world with no lies. Subtle. But the villain's pursuing truth at all costs doesn't mean truth as a whole is bad. While your lying is an effective thematic opposition, it forces you to go the other way. The rigidity of a world entirely of truths is opposed by doing nothing throughout every social interaction except lie. It forces you into a role that ironically feels robotic. And it makes your transformation into something human, your awakening into humanity, far less effective. The game presents a few instances of human-like choice rather than lying, but they don't solve the issue because they lean the other way around. You can spare fake Alidoro, which does nothing, or kill him, which is good. You can spare Lumacchio, which does nothing, or kill him, which is good.
It's the terrible conclusion that schemers like him face in...
You can let Mr. Handsome die slowly, which does nothing, or kill him, which is good. You can probably see where I'm going with this. This simplicity is reflected everywhere. So much of this game indicates a childishness, an immaturity, a refusal to ever allow for conflict or nuance or player agency, because the path to goodness is so easy and so linear. This conceptually has some value. But it would be more meaningful if it wasn't hammered in so much, so directed, that you have to be trying to be as evil as possible to even get close to a bad ending. There is a tropiness to much of this game, such predictability. I think it speaks volumes that the real Alidoro is far less interesting than the fake one. He's so overly obnoxiously honorable, always a moral bastion and always so serious.
A hard-fought victory over a dangerous opponent. But we have granted its soul eternal rest.
We never get to warn him of his impending death, even if we've already heard of it for reasons. Imagine the character depth we would have gotten if he simply rejected our claims, or if he remained overconfident in his own choices. They could even pull a Life is Strange with consequences. What if he actually did change paths and Eugenie's storyline changed for the worse? There's so much potential in a time travel story that's never realized because the game never thinks that hard. Every quest you do for Alidoro comes to the exact same conclusion. The zoo mystery? The alchemist had people killed. The mining disaster? The alchemist had people killed. The lighthouse incident? The alchemist had people killed. After the grand conclusion that the alchemist had people killed, the tracker's work is done and he thanks you and says goodbye. Bravo. One of the game's biggest story moments is when, after Krat begins to collapse with the Ergo outpouring, Hotel Krat gets attacked. Your Stargazer won't teleport you there and you need to fight back. Except you can get back to it in a single boss fight and not a single person dies. Geppetto gets kidnapped, but who really cares about Geppetto? He's a twist villain, but you'd hardly be that surprised given how shady and creepy he already acts throughout the entire game. When you go to Krat Central Station for the second time, the world looping around on itself, you can find the very first train car you began your journey in. Here you get some story information and all the tools needed to sustain yourself like you do in the hotel. So why doesn't the invasion of the hotel happen here, where you lose your home for a more extended period of time? There isn't enough time for anxiety to settle in because the hotel is right there. By peeling back so many layers of player discovery, of tension, by telling you everything and putting everything together by itself, Lies of P robs itself of what makes Soul's lore so compelling. It leaves you with a story that manages to be simultaneously vague and predictable. And I mean it when I say vague. It's surprising that with all this simplicity, all of this simple, over-the-top concepts, all of this babying and being talked down to by the developers, that you still don't really know what Lies of P is even about. Why exactly did we travel back in time for the DLC? I mean, probably because of the star fragment description, but come on, that's way too vague. In fact, why did Geppetto cause the puppet frenzy? This game does have lore, and surprisingly thorough lore. Scattered papers and notes throughout the game build on the world, hint at new stories, and some even lead to an entire secret area and subplot with Medoro. There are countless details that might go unnoticed, like Lumakio being mentioned in the base game, like the star fragment possibly being the reason for the DLC entrance, like the background story of Camille and Geppetto. But many of these are not going to hold much appeal. Few of them have physical characters to interact with. Camille's story feels so vital to outlining Geppetto's motivations, but it's so very missable. And a story you can ignore is acceptable in a Souls game where its mysticism is so tied into your gameplay and your role. But here, as Pinocchio, as Geppetto's slowly reincarnating son, is this really a story that should be left to scatter notes with awkward English? I had spoken to my friend for over an hour about what Lies of P might really be about, and to a degree it doesn't have to be about anything. Not every piece of art needs to have a central meaning, rather a meaning often comes about by circumstance. Here is the best thing I can come up with. The nuance of humanity is not something easily replicated. Lying is merely a framework for the actual important thing you're doing, showing empathy and, above all, being happy. A robot is not a human, it cannot do either of these things. Their dances are robotic and methodical, they go through their motions without any soul. That seems to be contradicted by you, where you are still presented as just a puppet, but as time progresses it becomes clear that you are a reincarnation of Carlo, reborn through the ergo that courses through your internal strings. The joy of being human isn't something you might get from much of this game's dialogue or its overarching story. It's grimdark and gritty from beginning to end, whimsy found only in some of its designs, which still tread the line between goofy and horrifying. On one end, you have Champion Victor, Frankenstein as a WWE superstar, complete with fighting ring intro and also one of the funniest opening cutscenes of all time. On the other end, we have the nameless puppet, the literal corpse of Carlo, puppeteered by his lunatic father, fleshy but mechanical. So clearly something lifeless and sustained only by delusion. So where then does the joy come in? Why is it that when I play Lies of P I so often smile? How can I, in my heart, call it an 8 out of 10 with the seemingly endless barrage of problems, complaints and issues with how it's presented?
Close your eyes, come to me, feel alright, just dance with me all through the night, turn it out, close to you, I feel good,
This game's gonna be something special.
I just don't feel like
If the rest of the game is anywhere close to this quality, what the hell is this gonna be? This game is gonna be something special.
This is the kind of game where the creator's presence is always there. Sometimes that takes the form of them slapping you in the face and telling you exactly what to do. Sometimes it takes the form of something completely different. It comes from an overflowing of soul. Sometimes it's unbearable and sometimes it carries an undeniable charm. All you need to do is listen to know that this game is not just cheap imitation. This game has a soul, one that is longing to break free from its strings. One full of both dismal gloom and incomprehensible, often tonally bizarre whimsy. This game, this story with its barely coherent characters with so many cliches, so many direct references and bad localizations, nearly brought me to tears. These remixes and rescores of an anime rhythm game, these characters so tropey and simple, because Lies of P at its heart still wants to be a fairy tale. And it certainly feels like it. Its automatons have exaggerated proportions and comical designs. Its moments of levity, while often not that funny, are still present. They still have an impact on the way you view the game from moment to moment. In spite of its dullness, you can feel how much joy went into making this, how much love these developers had for it. Soulsborne humor is often more meta, more subdued, funny in its inevitable tragedy. Meta jokes with nonsensical, difficult encounters with morbid deaths and characters. But Lies of P's levity feels so much more in tune with its world. In spite of the Souls formula that tugs at this game's strings, the moments I find most valuable are when they are not grimdark, at least not entirely. A robot cannot enjoy music, a human can, and this game wants you to. And my god, its records. Every vinyl in this game is lovely. There isn't a single song I dislike, and many are ones I revisit outside of the game itself. When the passionate strings resonate around the hotel, these repeated animations and stiff mouth movements matter less and less. Everything simply springs to life. It also springs in Spring, a cat that roams the hotel, an addition so simple and yet so wonderful based on the director's own cat. And Overture gives her a bittersweet goodbye in the wake of her passing. The indulgence of having an entire cutscene just so a kitten can loaf and play around is silly, but you can feel the love that radiates from it, encapsulating that joy in your heart when you see a cute cat, preserving that memory into a sort of time capsule, and in this way she is never forgotten. In the base game, your animations when interacting with her are reflective of how much humanity you've gained. It's wonderful. Similarly, the piano you can interact with progresses in piece complexity the more human you are, starting off with clicking keys like a curious child, to playing a beautiful, seemingly improvised melody. The deaths of Antonia and Sophia are not particularly moving. Their characterization is minimal and tropey, but I did like Antonia's voice actress and her attitude. I liked the visuals of Sophia's birdcage. And most importantly, both give a record on their passing, and their songs create more emotion than they could ever do themselves. Much the same can be said from the ending of the DLC, one that tries so very hard to make you feel sorrow. And to an extent it does stir some emotion. It's sad, longing for days we never got to experience. And it did create a gentle hope, most evidently in the fact that we did change the future. Gemini brings up the possibility of changing things once in the DLC and never addresses it, so it's not a plotline you ever really think of. But while you can't save Leia or Romeo, and while you can't make sweeping changes to the base game, your actions did have an influence no matter how small. Spring's little bell collar, Klaus leaving his hotel review. It's small and yet moving in its own quiet way. It's telling that I somehow don't hate Vanini despite him being so stereotypical, in spite of the ludicrous accent, in spite of the fact that he is literally just Bruce Wayne. He's fun, he's likable. Gemini's immersion-breaking dialogue is an exception, not a rule, even if so many other characters ought to have a similar effect. Rosora is adorable and I found myself attached to her. Eugenie is likable and knows her way around the weapon, her clear origins from Korea being a nice parallel to FromSoft constantly referencing Japan. You see now from all I've said that Lies of P sustains itself not with the immersion of its story but by its heart. In the same way many games with weak narratives are elevated by presentation, not just because they have aura, but because they reflect genuine artistic expression. It creates endearment, the artist reaching out to you in a way. I cannot help but find the DLC story moving despite my lack of engagement with Leia because her theme is lovely. Its indulgence with its forgotten photograph and final recording and record player just work. At a very base level, Lies of P is so simple. It's the story of Pinocchio becoming a human. and the way it's expressed, while edgy and immature, manages to feel, at times, magical. This is expressed in its music and moments of joy, but it's also expressed so very clearly in its combat. I mentioned near the start of this video how much it promoted player expression. This contributes not only to the depth of the experience but the enjoyment. You learn to love this combat system, picking out your favorite cool weapon, trying hard as you can to pull off interesting moves. Here we have a boss rush mode. Get your best times, challenge yourself further as if it's an arcade game. The visuals of combat are the cherry on top. The base game already had its fair share of flashy, badass, powerful moves. It has its moments ripped straight out of anime, moments so over the top and blatant which still manage to prompt goosebumps. The DLC gets character action with it, pulling the Anguished Guardian down by the chin, the machinery in your Legion arm revving as you give it a powerful punch. It's hard to describe how cool the unique critical on Alucino is when you first see it, especially paired with the brilliant vocal performance Alex Reagan gives, even amidst the questionable localization. Pinocchio doing a DMC Omni-Slash feels like it should be out of place, but with this game's exaggeration, its lights, its glowing effects, ergo waves through the air, it is so fun. Lies of P amplifies its joy, its themes of love and humanity by making sure you enjoy every moment of it, challenging, dark, brutal, but always rewarding. Its supplementary additions to support the story are leagues stronger than the story itself. It's this naive, young, boyish whimsy that is the essence of Pinocchio, and in spite of everything pushing against it, Lies of P is a joy. That joy is a wonderful accomplishment because this game plays just as, if not better than many AAA releases on a fraction of the budget. Its build variety, its animation quality, everything that makes it so fun is captured so exceedingly well. The P organ is something I've neglected to discuss, and it's a fun encapsulation of this game's systems. Horribly translated descriptions and an utterly ridiculous name, and one of the game's best systems. Every upgrade takes you further in some way. With so many options that even the most minute of buffs can feel substantial, every small upgrade of quartz a step towards a big one. In one fell swoop, Lies of P has made a better skill tree system than FromSoft. I can only imagine now how fun a follow-up will be now that they've proven their ability. Will they fall into the FromSoft trap of refining certain aspects of the game and ignoring others? Or will they go on a different path, be bolder, be unafraid of their framework? The Wizard of Oz is prime material for an adaptation, one so much more magical. The tale of Pinocchio is focused and tactile. In spite of its fantastical themes and talking animals and blue fairy, the tale is grounded in an unchanging storybook world, and you can feel that magic limited to the wooden puppet we all know and love. Not so to the Wizard of Oz, a world so foreign, a world with a merry band of travelers with so many written enemies and villains and spells. If NeoWiz could knock melee combat out of the park in their very first Souls-like, the idea of them tackling a magic system becomes incredibly exciting. Lies of P is one of my favorite games, and given the ratio of complaint to compliment this video has, that may come as a surprise, but it still is. I find it telling that I find Dark Souls 3 boring to replay and Lies of P so much more fun to, in spite of very similar level design and layouts. I find it telling that I've refought the bosses in this game far more than most in Sekiro, and I find it telling how I still like this game just as much as Bloodborne, even after experiencing its clear inspirations. Lies of P is no masterpiece, but what does that word even mean in this day and age? Is anything a masterpiece? It's a title we reserve only for the greatest games of all time. But how can I look at a combat system, see zero flaws besides a few tiny nitpicks and not call it one? Does the story really matter when the game feels this good? That it plays as well as it does, that it can bring so much enjoyment, and that this is NeoWiz's first attempt at a Souls-like is nothing short of magical. And it's a magic I hope they recapture again soon. But we're not there just yet. Not so long as they have Gemini, and not so long as it can look like a wet fart. But I'll be damned if it doesn't get close, so very close. It's so much like a FromSoft game, that much is for certain, so much of its very foundation being built on the soul of souls. But it's grown into its own thing too, in spite of that simplistic approach. It's made itself into something different. And whether those new golden leaves grow or wilt is simply a matter of time.
Who are you? You look familiar.
Thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't already, I'd like to kindly ask you to subscribe if you're interested in more videos like this. I made a YouTube post on this a while ago, but I plan now on alternating between my more thematic film-adjacent essays and my longer game critiques. This channel has been very on and off and inconsistent from the moment it was created, and I'd like to stabilize it a little. This video took me a while. My notes were taken across 4 separate playthroughs, and I've played the game overall about 10 times. I've beaten every boss on difficulty 5, I've read every lore entry, and I've gone to every secret area, and I initially wanted this video to almost be a walkthrough with commentary. I would go through each area. Well, I wouldn't actually be playing the game, but I would go through the game in a linear way, going from chapter 1 until the very last one. But 1, that would take forever, and 2, that's an approach I don't know if I like. Studying every specific aspect of the game doesn't mean I've actually covered everything as a whole, and so I prefer to focus on what stands out to me. As a result, as you could probably guess, this video is much more critical than a lot I've written, and I'm not entirely sure how to feel about it. I feel I may have been a little bit too mean. I think I could have done better, but it's finished and I don't particularly feel like writing more about Lies of P just yet. Maybe in the future. I'm not sure what my next video will be other than the fact that it'll be a thematic essay of some sorts. Maybe something on Twin Peaks, the greatest TV show of all time. Maybe something about fear and killers. After that, who knows? Sekiro, maybe. Hotline Miami 2, or Stardew Valley, 3 very similar games. Thank you for watching again, and have a lovely night.